Society conditions us to believe that our parents will always be our ultimate protectors when our lives are on the line. Instead, my darkest hour taught me that family ties can be severed the moment they become inconvenient. To understand how my family could leave me bleeding in a recovery room, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem I was raised in. My name is Samantha, and for 28 years, I existed as a background character in the reality show that was my cousin Chloe's life. Chloe is the daughter of my mother's older sister, Aunt Susan. In my family, Aunt Susan was the undisputed matriarch, a woman who wielded passive aggression like a scalpel. My mother, Brenda, spent her entire life desperate for Susan's approval. By extension, that meant Chloe was treated as the golden child by everyone, including my own parents. When I graduated with honors from college, my parents left the ceremony early because Chloe had a minor panic attack over a bad haircut and needed family support. That was the baseline of my existence, but I dealt with it. I moved out, built a career as an architect, and kept my distance. However, things changed drastically the year I turned 28. For months, I had been suffering from excruciating, radiating pain in my lower back and left leg. It started as a dull ache and escalated until I was dragging my foot, barely able to stand at my drafting table. After endless MRIs, specialists and nerve tests, Dr. Miller, a top neurosurgeon, sat me down with a grim expression. I had severe degenerative disc disease combined with a massive herniation that was compressing my spinal cord. If I didn't have a complex spinal fusion at the L4 to L5 and S1 levels immediately, I risked permanent nerve damage. I could lose the use of my left leg entirely. It was terrifying. The surgery was invasive, requiring an 8-hour operation where they would literally screw my spine together with titanium rods. The recovery would be brutal, requiring weeks of careful monitoring and physical therapy. Dr. Miller's office pulled strings to get me in as an emergency case. The date was set. Friday, November 14th. I cried tears of relief in my car. Then I looked at the calendar, and my stomach plummeted. November 14th was the exact weekend of Chloe's 25th birthday. For 6 months, Aunt Susan had been organizing Chloe's quarter-century Cabo extravaganza. It was a 5-day, all-expenses-paid trip to a luxury resort in Mexico for the entire extended family. My parents had already paid their share. I had politely declined months ago, citing work, which had caused a minor family uproar at the time. Knowing the inevitable backlash, I drove to my parents' house to break the news in person. I found my mother, Brenda, and my father, Tom, in the living room, surrounded by summer clothes they were packing. "Mum, Dad, I have some news," I started, my voice trembling. I explained the diagnosis, the risk of paralysis, and the surgery date. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother didn't gasp. She didn't rush over to hug me. She looked at the calendar on the wall, then looked at my father. "November 14th, my mother said, her voice tight. "Samantha, that's the day our flight leaves for Cabo. You know that." "I know," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "But Dr. Miller said I can't wait. If I bump the spine wrong, the nerve could die. I need you guys here. I'm terrified." My father cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Well, kiddo, can't they just push it back a week? It's Chloe's big 2-5. Susan has non-refundable deposits. It's going to look terrible if we don't show up." I stared at the man who was supposed to protect me. "Dad, I am talking about losing my leg. I'm talking about spinal surgery." The next hour was a masterclass in gaslighting. My mother called Aunt Susan on speakerphone. Susan's shrill voice filled the room, accusing me of purposely scheduling my procedure to steal the spotlight from Chloe. "She's always been jealous, Brenda," Susan hissed. "She just can't stand that Chloe is getting a destination birthday. It's a bad back, for God's sake. Give her a Tylenol and tell her to stop being dramatic." I snapped. I yelled. I cried. And finally, I pulled up the MRI on my phone, shoving it in my mother's face. "Look at it. My spine is collapsing. I need my parents." The sheer desperation in my voice must have broken through a tiny sliver of their delusion. My mother looked at the black and white image, then sighed, playing the ultimate martyr. "Fine. Fine, Samantha. We will stay. We will miss the trip. I'll deal with the fallout from your aunt. But I hope you appreciate the sacrifice we're making for you." For the next 2 weeks, they made sure I felt that sacrifice. Every phone call was filled with sighs and complaints about how much money they lost, how Chloe was crying every day because her favorite aunt and uncle wouldn't be there. But despite the guilt trips, I felt a twisted sense of comfort. They had chosen me. When it came down to a life-altering surgery versus a party, they were going to be by my hospital bed. I had no idea that they had already planned the ultimate betrayal. The morning of November 14th was crisp and grey. My parents picked me up at 5 a.m. to drive me to the hospital. The tension in the car was thick. They were unusually quiet, casting nervous glances at each other, constantly checking their phones. I noticed my dad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I chalked it up to anxiety about my surgery. I thought they were finally realizing the gravity of what I was about to go through. When we pulled into the hospital parking garage, my dad popped the trunk. I saw 2 large, overstuffed rolling suitcases inside. "Why do you have those?" I asked, a sliver of confusion cutting through my pre-surgery nausea. My mother didn't miss a beat. "Oh, hospital waiting rooms are so cold, honey. We packed blankets, pillows, a change of clothes, and all our toiletries, so we don't have to leave your side for the next few days. We're camping out." It sounded bizarrely overprepared, but I was so touched by the sentiment that I actually teared up. "Thank you, Mum," I whispered. They walked me to the pre-op ward. I changed into the flimsy gown, shivering as the nurses hooked me up to IVs. My parents stood at the foot of my bed. My dad was aggressively checking his Apple Watch. It was 6:45 a.m. My surgery was scheduled to begin at 7:30 a.m. "We love you, Sam," my mother said, kissing my forehead. Her perfume smelled sharp. "We'll be right out there in the waiting room the whole time. Don't you worry about a thing." "See you on the other side, kiddo," my dad said, squeezing my hand. He checked his watch again. The anesthesiologist pushed the medication into my IV line. The room started to spin, a warm, heavy blanket settling over my brain. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was my parents turning their backs to my bed, practically speed-walking toward the exit doors. When I woke up, the pain was unimaginable. It wasn't just a physical ache. It felt as though a hot iron rod had been hammered into my lower back. The room was dark, save for the blinking lights of monitors. My mouth was full of cotton, my throat raw from the breathing tube. I groaned, trying to shift, and a blinding agony shot down my leg. Instantly, a nurse was by my side. Her name tag read, Jackie. She had warm, crinkling eyes. "Shh, Samantha, don't try to move. You just had major spinal surgery. You're in the ICU. The surgery was a success, but you have a long road ahead." "Mum?" I croaked, the word tearing at my throat. "Dad?" Nurse Jackie's warm expression faltered. A look of deep, uncomfortable pity washed over her face. She looked away, adjusting my blankets unnecessarily. Let's just get your pain managed first, honey. I'm going to up your morphine." "Where are they?" I pushed, panic rising in my chest, making the heart monitor beep frantically. They were in the waiting room. They had bags. Jackie stopped. She let out a heavy sigh, walked over to the small counter by the sink, and picked up a folded piece of hospital stationery. She walked back to my bed, looking like she was about to deliver a death notice. "Samantha, the charge nurse found this taped to the door of your room when they brought you down from recovery," Jackie said softly. My hands were shaking so violently from the anesthesia and the panic that I could barely unfold the paper. I recognized my mother's neat, cursive handwriting immediately. "Sam, Dr. Miller came out and told us you were successfully under anesthesia and that the prep was going fine. Since you are completely safe and in the hands of the medical team, your father and I realized there's nothing we can actually do for you right now but sit in a chair." Susan was absolutely in hysterics this morning. She said if we missed the family photo on the yacht tomorrow, Chloe's birthday would be ruined. We caught a direct flight out of LAX. We know you understand. You wouldn't want to ruin your cousin's special day. We'll call the nurses' station tomorrow to check on you. Love, Mum and Dad. I read it twice, then a third time. My brain, foggy from painkillers, struggled to process the words. Flight out of LAX. Yacht. Chloe's birthday. They didn't just leave. They had planned it. The suitcases in the trunk weren't filled with blankets for the waiting room. They were packed with swimsuits and resort wear. They had dropped me off, waited exactly long enough for me to be unconscious, and then literally ran to their car to make an 8:30 a.m. flight to Mexico. They left while my spine was being sliced open. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The betrayal was so massive, so incomprehensibly cruel, that it felt like a second physical trauma. I went entirely numb. An hour later, my best friend Harper arrived. She was my emergency contact, the one who was supposed to take over sitting with me in the evenings so my parents could rest. When she walked in, carrying a hideous stuffed bear to make me laugh, she took one look at my face and dropped it. "Sam? What happened? Where are your parents?" she asked, rushing to my side. I just pointed to the note on the tray table. I watched Harper read it. I watched her face go from confusion to shock to a rage so fiery it practically radiated off her skin. They went to Cabo," she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "They left you here, today?" "Check Instagram," I rasped, staring blankly at the ceiling. Harper pulled out her phone. It didn't take long. Chloe's profile was public, and she had been documenting every second of her birthday month. Harper hesitated, holding the phone against her chest. "Sam, you don't need to see this." "Show me," I demanded. She turned the screen toward me. It was a video posted 3 hours ago, exactly when Dr. Miller was drilling screws into my vertebrae. It was a boomerang video of my family on the deck of a catamaran. In the center was Chloe, wearing a sparkly tiara. And right beside her, holding a massive margarita and laughing with her head thrown back, was my mother. Around my mother's neck was the delicate gold chain she had promised to give me that morning as a bravery charm for the surgery. She had forgotten to give it to me, but she remembered to wear it to the beach. "I'm going to kill them," Harper breathed, her hands trembling. "I'm going to call them right now and tear them to shreds." "No," I said. My voice was suddenly very clear, stripping away the haze of the morphine. The realization was absolute. The parents I thought I had didn't exist. The people on that boat were strangers who shared my DNA. "Don't call them," I told Harper, locking eyes with her. "They made their choice. Now I make mine. They are dead to me." The next 5 days were a blur of blinding pain, beeping monitors, and the humiliating reality of relying on strangers to help me use a bedpan. Every time I had to be rolled over so the nurses could check the dressing on my 6-inch spinal incision, I bit down on a towel to keep from screaming. The physical agony was immense, but the emotional void was heavier. Through it all, Harper never left. She slept in the uncomfortable vinyl chair by my bed, bullied the nurses into bringing me extra ice packs, and held my hand while I took my first agonizing steps with a walker. My parents, meanwhile, were living it up in Cabo San Lucas. I know this because my mother left me 3 voicemails over the course of the trip. I didn't answer the phone, but Harper played them for me on speaker. The first was on Saturday, the day after my surgery. "Hi Sam, it's Mum. We're just checking in. The yacht was amazing, though the sun was a bit strong. Aunt Susan is treating everyone to a spa day right now. Call us back and let us know if the doctor gave you any decent painkillers. Love you." The second was on Monday. "Samantha, I don't know why you're ignoring our calls. It's very childish. Your father is getting worried, and frankly, you are stressing me out on what is supposed to be a celebratory family vacation. Send a text." The audacity was breathtaking. There was no inquiry about whether I was paralyzed, no question about the nerve damage, just annoyance that my silence was a mild inconvenience to her margarita buzz. On Tuesday morning, I was officially transferred to an inpatient rehabilitation facility across town. Before I left the hospital, I asked the charge nurse for a stack of forms. With Harper as my witness, I legally revoked my parents' HIPAA clearance. I removed them as my emergency contacts, replacing them with Harper, and explicitly instructed the rehab facility's security that Thomas and Brenda were not permitted past the front desk. I was completely severing the cord. Wednesday was the day they flew back to Los Angeles. I knew exactly when their flight landed because my phone began blowing up with texts around 2 p.m. First, confusion. "We are at the hospital. They say you aren't here. Where did you go?" Then anger. "Samantha, the nurse refused to tell us where you were transferred. This is ridiculous. Call your father immediately." I turned my phone off and handed it to Harper. "If they find out where I am, they'll show up," I said, my voice exhausted. "I don't want to see them." It took them exactly 4 hours to track me down by calling every post-op rehab center in the county. At 6:30 p.m., the phone in my room rang. It was the front desk. "Samantha, we have a Thomas and Brenda here for you. Security is holding them in the lobby because they aren't on your approved visitor list. The gentleman is getting quite loud." I closed my eyes. A part of me wanted to cower in my bed, but the rage that had been simmering in my chest since I woke up alone in the ICU finally boiled over. I wasn't going to hide. "Harper, help me into the wheelchair," I said. Harper pushed me down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway toward the lobby. Through the glass double doors, I saw them. My mother was deeply tanned, wearing a brightly colored sundress and a massive straw hat, looking utterly ridiculous in the clinical setting of a spinal rehab center. My father was red-faced, jabbing his finger at the security guard. In my mother's hand was a small, gaudy gift bag stuffed with pink tissue paper. When the doors slid open, they turned. My mother's face instantly arranged itself into a mask of exaggerated maternal concern. She rushed forward, arms outstretched. "Oh, my poor baby," she cooed loudly, clearly performing for the nurses and security guards. "We were so worried. Why on earth did you ban us from your room? We came straight from the airport." "Stop right there," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was lined with ice. The security guard stepped between us, putting a hand up. My mother halted, looking genuinely bewildered. "Samantha, what is wrong with you? We brought you a gift. We got you a beautiful silver bracelet from a local artisan in Cabo." She held out the tacky pink bag like it was a peace offering, like a piece of jewelry could make up for the fact that she had abandoned me. My father crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Stop the dramatics, Samantha. Your mother has been worried sick. We had a family obligation, and we fulfilled it. You're clearly fine. You're sitting up." "I have 6 titanium screws in my spine," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of pain and pure adrenaline. "I had to learn how to stand up again yesterday. I was screaming in agony while you were on a catamaran with Chloe. You didn't fulfill a family obligation, Dad. You abandoned your daughter during a major medical crisis for a birthday party." "Susan had non-refundable deposits," my mother shrieked, her facade cracking. "Do you know how she would have treated us if we didn't go? We would have been exiled. And what do you think I'm doing to you right now?" I shot back. The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the vending machine in the corner seemed deafening. My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, the fake tan unable to hide the sudden pallor of her face. "What does that mean?" my father demanded. "It means you made your choice," I said, gripping the armrests of my wheelchair. "You chose Aunt Susan. You chose Chloe. You chose a vacation over my safety and my life. So I am giving you exactly what you want. You are completely free of me. Do not call me. Do not come to my apartment. If you try to contact me again, I will have the police issue a restraining order." "You can't do that!" my mother wailed, finally sensing the absolute finality in my eyes. "We are your parents." "Not anymore," I whispered. I looked at Harper and nodded. She turned the wheelchair around. As we rolled back through the security doors, I heard my mother start to sob, loudly and performatively. But for the first time in 28 years, I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. I just felt free. The next 2 years were a crucible of physical and emotional rebuilding. I spent 6 months in rigorous, excruciating physical therapy, slowly regaining the strength in my left leg. I threw myself into my architecture career, eventually landing a promotion to senior project manager. I spent holidays with Harper's loud, chaotic, and incredibly loving family. I built a life that was completely immune to the toxic demands of my blood relatives. I held firm to my boundary. I blocked my parents' phone numbers, filtered their emails straight to the trash, and ignored the guilt-tripping letters my mother occasionally mailed to my office. Through the family grapevine, mostly via my cousin David, who had always seen through Aunt Susan's tyranny, I heard bits and pieces of the fallout. Apparently, Aunt Susan had spun a narrative that I was a jealous, unhinged brat who was punishing my parents for going on a trip. My parents, desperate to save face, went along with it. They fully embedded themselves in Susan and Chloe's lives to compensate for the daughter they had lost. But toxic systems always collapse in on themselves eventually. 2.5 years after my surgery, the house of cards fell apart. It started when Chloe got engaged to a wealthy, arrogant tech bro. Predictably, Chloe demanded a wedding that rivaled a royal coronation. She wanted a multi-day event in Lake Como, Italy, complete with chartered flights for the bridal party. Aunt Susan, whose finances were largely a facade built on credit card debt, couldn't afford it. So, Susan did what she always did. She manipulated my mother. She convinced Brenda that since she no longer had to pay for my future wedding, it was her duty as an aunt to step up and help fund Chloe's dream. Desperate to keep her position as Susan's loyal lapdog, my mother actually drained a significant portion of her and my father's retirement savings to pay for the floral arrangements and the catering deposit. But Chloe was a monster of their own making. 3 months before the wedding, Chloe decided that the aesthetic of her Lake Como extravaganza needed to be strictly high society. She ruthlessly cut the guest list, and to my mother's absolute horror, Chloe uninvited my parents. David told me the whole story over coffee. Chloe literally told Brenda that Tom's suits were too off the rack, and that they wouldn't fit the vibe of the wealthy guests, David said, shaking his head in disbelief. And Aunt Susan backed her up. Susan told your mum to stop being selfish and to think about Chloe's big day. My parents had bankrolled the wedding of the century, only to be tossed out like garbage because they didn't look rich enough for the photos. The betrayal shattered my mother. She had sacrificed her own daughter at the altar of Aunt Susan, only to realize she was nothing but an ATM and a doormat. The stress of the financial loss and the humiliation caused my father, Tom, to suffer a mild myocardial infarction, a heart attack. He was hospitalized for 4 days. Neither Susan nor Chloe visited him. Chloe was too busy at a dress fitting in New York. A week later, I was sitting in my office reviewing blueprints when the receptionist buzzed my desk. "Samantha, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's your mother." I froze. A cold wash of adrenaline hit my system. I could have told security to escort her out, but I realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was curious to see what desperation looked like on the woman who had abandoned me. I walked out to the lobby. Brenda was standing by the glass elevators. She looked like she had aged 10 years. The perfectly highlighted hair was dull, her posture was slumped, and she was wringing her hands nervously. When she saw me, standing tall in a tailored suit, wearing high heels, perfectly healthy, she let out a choked sob. "Samantha," she wept, taking a step toward me. "Oh, look at you. You look so beautiful. You're walking perfectly." "What do you want, Brenda?" I asked, keeping my distance. She flinched at the use of her first name. "We made a mistake," she cried, tears spilling over her cheeks, ruining her makeup. "A terrible, terrible mistake. Susan, Chloe, they used us. They took our money. They banned us from the wedding. And when your father was in the hospital last week, they didn't even call. We have no one, Sam. We realize now that you were the only one who actually loved us." She reached into her purse and pulled out a familiar object. It was the delicate gold chain, the bravery charm she had promised me the morning of my surgery, the one she had worn on the catamaran. Her hands shook as she held it out to me. "I saved it for you," she whispered. "Please, Samantha. We are so sorry. We want our daughter back. Your father is so weak. We need you." I looked at the gold necklace dangling from her trembling fingers. Then I looked at the woman holding it. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of daughterly obligation, any spark of pity. There was nothing. The well was completely dry. "You don't want your daughter back, Brenda," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You just want a safety net. You realized that the people you sold me out for don't value you. So you're crawling back to the backup plan so you don't have to die alone." No, that's not true," she wailed, drawing the attention of my co-workers. "You left me to be cut open so you wouldn't miss a party," I stated, the brutal truth hanging in the air between us. "You proved that when things get hard, you will leave. I survived the hardest moment of my life without you. I don't need you now, and I certainly don't want you." "Please," she begged, sinking to her knees right there in the corporate lobby. "We're family. Blood is a biological coincidence," I said, turning my back on her. "Family is a choice, and you made yours 2.5 years ago." I walked back through the security doors, the sound of her sobbing fading as the heavy glass shut behind me. I went back to my desk, picked up my pen, and got back to work. People often ask if I regret walking away. The truth is, my only regret is that it took a shattered spine to see the shattered reality of my family. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but self-preservation is a vital instinct. I lost my parents, but I gained my life, my dignity, and a chosen family who would never leave me in the dark. Sometimes, the most profound healing begins the moment you finally walk away.